We got one by Chris Williamson where he's interviewing Erica Komisar. Good morning, USA. I've got a feeling that it's gonna be. Alright. Let's do it.
Why do you think your work is seen as controversial?
Well, a number of reasons. I think
I can't honestly tell whether this woman's British or not, and I kind of want to know. I think she's actually American or something, or at least her accent is. I'm not sure.
some of the things I talk about, even though they're truths, they're inconvenient truths.
It feels like almost a liminal. It feels like a liminal pattern of speech.
My first book was about the importance of attachment.
I think she's American.
Attachment security, the first 3 years, and a mother's presence. And so I think
somehow just like her look in general would have expected me to, like, I would have thought like, oh, she's definitely British or something like that. She looks kind of prim and proper.
Originally, when that book came out, it was.
Wait a second. Is this like his new setup? Because this feels more permanent as far as it goes. I wonder if he's actually got an actual studio, because I'd seen something on his channel about him getting like an actual studio. Might have been some sort of live stream.
Perceived as a message.
Sorry. I was just looking at this in the background. I think that's from that famous painting, right? Someone trying to touch God's hand or whatever.
I think originally when that book came out, it was perceived as a message, which it really wasn't, which was an anti-feminist message that women shouldn't work. That wasn't
boo feminism.
The message of the book at all.
It's really empowering. Tradwifery. Getting a man to do everything for you because you deserve. No. To be fair, like it does feel like that's a little bit like. It's almost perhaps in the way you look at it a little bit. Because some people would consider being treated like a queen, i.e. being like a trad wife, having a man go out and work and earn stuff for you and then bring it back and then, kind of ruling over the household yourself. Some people would consider that to be a little bit empowering of a sort. Versus, no, I need to go out and do it myself. I guess, in that case, perhaps the argument would be independence. Like, you can do it all yourself. But, like, no one's... I feel like the notion of striving for independence is kind of a little bit... Maybe the lines just get a little bit blurred between the notion of independence and isolation. They kind of bleed together, depending on how hard you try. Like it...
Rather, it was a message about the importance of a mother or primary attachment figure's physical and emotional presence as much as possible in the first 3 years. And again, that's a sensitive message in a society that says work, work, work. Everybody should work, 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 and no one should raise their own children. And so I think that's how I originally became controversial. I think I'm controversial in many ways. I think my most recent book is controversial in other ways. My book on divorce, which...
Much less contentious topic.
It is, but
it
isn't, because the book actually makes the argument of this idea of 50-50 needs to be looked at very carefully, that we are treating children like possessions in divorces. So that's a sort of controversial idea. Yeah.
I think many people assume that kids are quite resilient.
Mm-hmm.
From your...
Well, I actually agree with that notion to some extent, but like... I don't know if divorce coincides with that. That's a pretty profound effect, I think.
Clinical work. What do most adults misunderstand about what divorce does to kids?
So, divorce we know is universally not great for children. It tests their emotional security. It tests their sense of permanence and trust in relationship.
Yeah, I would have thought the whole permanence thing would have been like a huge thing. So there would be this thing in theory that they would have grown up around, like i.e. their parents' love for one another, and beyond that, being the product of their parents' love for one another. That's feels like that would be a huge part of it as well. Like everyone wants to believe that. perhaps the romantic nature of their own origin, their own creation. They want to be the product of something that is good. Like, on some level, to hate the thing that gave birth to you, that gave rise to your own existence, is to hate yourself on some level. So I think people innately, they want to be the product of something that is positive, that is inspirational, that is good on a moral, like, aspirational level. And to have that thing broken up, it feels like it threatens that whole notion. Like, it threatens their notion of their own goodness. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit of armchair psychology. But it feels like that would have an effect on it. Not on only like the way you perceive your parents, but also on your perception of your own existence. All right. Enough blathering. Blithering?
So, one would never say it's good for children, and I certainly would never say it's good for children. There was a woman named Judith Wallerstein who wrote a book many, many years ago.
Wallerstein, Israel. Sorry.
Decades ago, about how all divorce is terrible for children and no one should divorce. Meaning the implication is you should stay with your spouse even though you don't get along with them for the benefit of the children. But
I suppose asterisk. In an ideal world, yes. But I think sometimes there are people who would maybe legitimately try to kill each other if they were together. Again, stay together if possible, yes. Separate, perhaps, if necessary. But, yeah. I was, like, as a Christian, I don't necessarily approve of the notion of at least divorce and remarriage, but, technically, maybe that's not obvious. A lot of Christians espouse those notions, but I tend to think that... I don't even know where I was going with that. I tend to think that in certain scenarios, separation, perhaps, in a litigious sense, is necessary. But I think in the eyes of God, till death do you part. What God hath put together, let not men tear asunder. If that makes sense.
Research that's come out more recently says that, well, no, divorce is not good for children. But there are ways to mitigate how bad it is, and it's that, in fact, chronic conflict, intractable conflict for children is much worse. So to live with parents who hate each other. So the ideal being two parents who love one another, respect one another, are affectionate.
I kind of like the pattern of the fabric here. I wonder what that is. It looks plush.
With one another. That's what's ideal for children. But if you can't have that and you have two parents who hate each other or who are in permanent conflict, that's actually shown to be worse for children's psyches.
I tend to think, generally speaking, you can make it work with almost anyone who's not actively trying to kill you. But maybe that's... I want to believe that's the case in any regard. Like, even people who you are very at odds with, just on a personal type of level, where your personalities literally just clash with one another, or you want very different things out of life, it feels like you can make it work to some extent, even if you just have to agree to disagree on certain things. But I feel like a lot of people these days, like, their remedy for conflict writ large, not with regards to marriage, but writ large, is get away from the other person. Your conflict will be solved if you go away to another place and get different friends and get blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying it can never be resolved by distance, but it feels like, in general, you kind of have to be able to figure out how to make it work with that sort of person. Like, if you're an incredibly assertive sort of person, you have to be capable of learning how to make it work with a person who's not very assertive. You have to learn how to operate with regards to those people. If you're a very submissive person, you have to learn how to behave with very assertive people. Because there's not like a place in the world where there are no assertive people. You have to be willing to learn how to stand up for yourself. And the notion that you can just go somewhere else and there will be different sorts of people there that'll make things easier for you to exist and to be in harmony and to develop good relationships, it's kind of a grass is greener type of mentality, and I don't think it's, generally speaking, a good thing.
than a good divorce. So what I say is a good divorce is better than a terrible marriage.
Okay. Does that mean that divorce is costless if the marriage is sufficiently bad?
No, it's not costless. It's still going to test children's sense of security. It's going to test their sense of permanence about relationships. These are things that will test. It will test their resilience. One of the things I say in the book, which is controversial, is that you shouldn't divorce till your children are at least 3 years of age. If you can help it, unless there's some kind of abusive situation going on. If there's physical abuse or sexual abuse, of course you should leave your spouse. That goes without saying. But if you're just not getting along, then if you can hold it and put your children first for the first 3 years, because we know that the first 3 years are the period of, the greatest brain growth. So from 0 to 3, 85% of the right brain has.
That's actually really interesting. So maybe I've mentioned this before in one of my videos, but I think there's a weird thing that we maybe have with regards to the notion of immortality, whatever. It's, I guess, purely academic at this point. But the notion would be that, oh, this person's 20,000 years old. How much they must have grown over that period of time. I don't know if that would necessarily be the case, because it feels like there would be a plateau to some extent. And I think I'd mentioned something to the effect that a 20-year-old will probably have much more in common with an 80-year-old than they would with a 3-year-old. Or an 8-year-old or something like that. So it feels like with regards to human growth, there's very much of like at the beginning of life, there's just this crazy amount of growth, crazy amount of development, and then it starts to level out. There's kind of a plateau. So it feels like past the age of like 100, I don't know if you would see a lot of like measurable increase in like self-awareness or like abilities per se. I think past that point, it would be more a thing of adaptation rather than, actual growth. If that makes sense. Like past that point, it would just kind of that curve would flatten out pretty much to the point where like a person who was 20,000 years old versus a person who was 100 years old, they would be virtually indistinguishable perhaps. It's kind of an interesting notion to think about in any case.
Grown by 3 years of age. And so you want to give your child as much stability and security and not having much conflict or stress in those years. So if parents can hold it for a few years, I mean, you were together, you loved each other at one point, you made this baby together, hold it for 3 years. Let your child develop a sense of...
See, I feel like the whole notion of people... Yeah, I don't know. Like, what makes you think it's going to be different with the next person? Like, that's kind of the glitch with all of it. Like, what do you think is going to make it different with the next person? If you can't make it work with this individual, unless there is some, like, incredibly unique sort of issues at play there, like, what's to say that those problems won't repeat themselves with the next individual? Because like even if you started out being very similar to this individual, it feels like the very nature of relationships is that you start to differentiate yourself perhaps from your, like, maybe I should be talking about this, I don't know that much about relationships, but it feels like even in those scenarios you start to adapt to the person you're with. Meaning when you start out in a relationship, you might be at a certain place in your life and you might be a certain way, but because your partner are who they are, and because their flaws are what they are, you start to almost adapt to that as well. You'll become different because of what your partner is. So, like, again, what's going to stop you the next time a person comes along from having that same issue? It feels like kind of a grass is greener type of problem.
Safety and security. And then if you have to divorce, do it after 3. That's what I encourage people to do.
Why does constant parental conflict damage children so deeply? What's it doing to...
Let me double check, because maybe this time I'm over top of him again. I think we're good. Ish.
To a child's system and brain development?
Stress. So we know that stress isn't good for children's brains. Well, it's not good for adults' brains either, but it's really not good for children's brains. So, you could
Mm.
think of what's happening to the brain is the brain is being architected in those first 3 years, and stress changes the architecture of the brain. So there is the stress regulating system. So the amygdala is this tiny little almond shaped part of the brain that
Amygdala.
is probably one of the oldest, most primitive parts of the brain, and it is responsible for putting us into survival mode, fight or flight. It protects us. So we say that a little bit of stress, which produces a little bit of cortisol, can protect us.
Cortisol vaccine. That's the thing that's come out recently too. Isn't that raising your cortisol levels or whatever? I think that was a thing that was, at least I believe it was. I heard it was popularized by Clavicular.
Right? But a lot of stress, which is chronic, which children cannot, their brains cannot.
See, I think I've like the notion of being good in a high intensity situation. Like, it's different from being good at dealing with stress. And maybe no one's really good at dealing with stress, like long term, like she says, like a chronic type of stress, rather than like a short burst of like high intense situation. That can be, I think, perhaps good for people, shake them up a little bit. But as far as like an abusive relationship or something like that, or a relationship where they cannot resolve it into some sort of functioning type of thing, that is it's unfortunate, because I think that I don't know if anyone's actually good at dealing with that. I don't know if anyone can deal with that like long term and be okay with it.
Handle.
Actually, you probably want to ask the doctor about this, but it feels like adrenaline in general is meant to activate in short bursts, right? It's meant for specific situations. It's not meant to. You're not meant to run on something like that for an extended period of time.
Changes the development of that brain, so that child later on can't deal with adversity and stress as well. There's actually a researcher at Columbia University who talked about how think about that part of the brain that regulates stress. It's meant to be offline for the first year, which is why mothers wearing babies on their bodies and carrying babies around, and then for the next 2 years after that first year, having them close by, keeps their buffer stress, keeps their stress levels quite low, introducing stress incrementally. And then after that 3-year period, children can begin to integrate more and more stress. But if you overly expose them in the beginning, you get an overactive amygdala that sets that baby into survival mode. And then that part of the brain sort of fizzles out. That's the best way I can put it. It sort of shrivels up and ceases to be functional in the future to handle stress and adversity. So just basic.
I guess I don't understand what the ramifications of that are. Like, would they be incapable of going into fight or flight or something?
Not good for children.
Or would they just be incapable of regulating their fight or flight thing?
What sort of person does that make in adulthood?
A person who can't deal with stress, a person who's anxious, who's depressed, who can't regulate their emotions. And that's what we have today. We have so many adults.
A neurotic personality type or something like that. Interesting.
Adults and young adults who can't regulate their emotions. So you could say that anxiety and depression and attentional issues are what everyone's calling ADHD, which isn't actually a condition. It's
EDHD. That
just a symptom of overexposure to stress. It's being in the flight mode of
ADHD
stress.
is a symptom of overexposure to stress.
It is. It's a hyper.
Okay. So I thought she said EDHD. ADHD.
Vigilant amygdala. It's when you're exposed to too much stress, more than you can handle, and you go into so you know what fight or flight mode is. It's our survival mode. So when we feel threatened or in danger,
like a threat analysis type of mode, which means effectively that you can't ignore anything and you have to pay attention to everything.
Sure. Either our
makes kind of sense.
Brains will go into, let me fight the predator that's chasing me, or let me run. And so distractibility is the running part. It is the fleeing from something that feels threatening. And if you're in a chronic state of stress, then you're always in that state of flight, or you're always in that state of fight. And so that's basically what it is. But those are conditions of emotional regulation. What it means is that children were overly exposed to stress in the beginning, and then the consequences of that are that they can't manage stress in the future.
So is it your opinion that much of the modern youth mental health problems can be laid at the feet of dysfunctional upbringings?
Yep, that's correct.
And I feel like it's stupid that this is the case, but that is actually probably a very controversial thing. Like anything discussing like divorce as a bad thing is weirdly very controversial these days. Like how far we've come in that regard. It kind of used to be a thing that divorce at the very least was a little bit shameful. And I don't think that's wrong. In general, I do not think that's wrong. The entire notion of marriage is sickness and health till death do you part. The fact that you made a commitment and now you've reneged on it on some level, that's a failure, is it not? It is literally a failure. You set out to accomplish a goal and you failed at it, and to treat it like anything but that, like what?
Not
so like, especially these days. Sorry, I'm cutting her off again. These days it feels like the twisted way people see it, where they almost like celebrate it, like, oh, you're free now. Like, yeah, you're free.
I mean, there's very little mental.
It's not a sign of. Yeah, I don't know. Again, it just feels like people like get very weird, depraved with regards to this type of thing, where again, like you're celebrating the end of a goal you set out to accomplish. You're celebrating your own failure to accomplish that goal. Like what?
Illness that is genetically connected. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, there's genetic precursors, but there's no genetic precursor for depression, anxiety, and ADHD.
There's no genetic precursor for
precursor.
No, but there is a genetic precursor for a sensitivity gene. And so what we found is a short allele on the serotonin receptor. So serotonin is necessary to pick up good feelings, but it's also a regulation gene, helps to regulate things like excitement. And what we know is that there are some babies who are born more neurologically sensitive. That means they're more sensitive to stress. And their brains are going to be triggered into that fight or flight.
Just throw you sensitive Andes out there, Sensitivity and perception, sometimes very hard to separate.
Flight state more easily than other
You can tell yourself that anyways. You weirdos.
Babies. So if you ask anyone who has more than one child, you say, do you have one child or two children, maybe who cry more easily, who are harder to soothe, who you couldn't put down, who sort of...
Put down just sounds weird. Now, for the record, I was very much of a crier when I was young, which I almost never cry these days. I don't know. Unless there's smoke involved, like if you're grilling something, that doesn't count. Or if it's really windy, also doesn't count. I'm not sad in either condition, okay? Not a crier. I'm a man. I'm a manly man.
Clung to your body more, who didn't sleep as well, who had eczema and rashes on their bodies, who were more sensitive to the clothing that you put on them, or the smells in the air, or the sounds were too loud. A lot of those babies are
so they're autistic?
Call neurologically sensitive or more sensitive to stress. And what the research shows is that if...
For the record, I've never... Maybe I should look up autism sometime. We could do a research thing on that. But like the whole notion of like exactly what it entails, you tend to think of it as being like categorically linked. It's maybe almost a little bit similar to narcissism in that people just think of autists as being like, oh, they're sensitive to sound, they're sensitive to light, they're sensitive to overstimulation in general. But I don't know if that's perhaps one part of it, but I don't think it's the entirety of it.
Those babies are given sensitive empathic nurturing if they're provided with a consistent physically and emotionally present primary attachment figure in the first year to 3 years, those babies, it neutralizes that sensitivity gene, so those babies can be as healthy as a baby who's born without that sensitivity gene. But if that baby is overly exposed to stress, if you separate them from their primary attachment figure, if you put them into daycare, if you treat attachments...
And that's perhaps another thing that should be remarked upon. It feels like a lot of people these days, they do the whole, like, having your children raised by someone else, and that might be just as unhealthy as the notion of divorce itself. Like, and for the record, I remember being babysat at times, but, like, again, it feels like the primary thing involved there should be the mother raising her children herself. That type of stability cannot be bought or sold. Or rather, you can't put a price on it.
Security with very little respect, the respect that it deserves, then those babies, it exacerbates that sensitivity gene.
Is this what people mean when they talk about HSPs, highly sensitive people, or is that some term that's just being concocted out of nowhere?
It's concocted, but it's so I suppose they're connecting it to the...
It feels like one of those things that a person who says emotional labor would use. I don't know. Just some sort of, like, colloquial head shrinker speak.
The genetic... I don't know whether that term was invented.
So it's a term that seems like a psychologist would use it, but a psychologist would maybe never ever use it. I'm not for sure, though. It's like something that a person who wasn't a psychologist would think psychologists would use.
Did when they found the gene, but the gene has been found for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that those babies who are not provided with that sensitive empathic nurturing and that buffering from stress and that presence of their primary attachment figure, you know, babies are born neurologically fragile. They're not born resilient. They're not born tough. They're not born capable of handling stress. They're born incredibly neurologically fragile. And so I always like to say that babies...
So, yeah. I would tend to think they're fragile in certain ways, but they're incredibly resilient in others. Depends on the scenario. Because, like, you can convince a kid that anything is normal for the record. And changes or scenarios, if you threw an adult into that same scenario, like, they would have a hard time adapting. It feels like kids are very good at adapting to that, like, type of change. But perhaps, again, like she says, with regards to stress or things like that, maybe a different story, perhaps.
Babies have a fourth trimester, which isn't real because a trimester is 3, right? But it's that 9 months after a baby is...
I like that. Fourth trimester.
Born, they're like marsupials. You know, I was just in Australia and I gave a speech and I said, babies are like marsupials. If we had pouches, that's how they should be on our bodies for the next year after they're born.
What is it that's causing the issue then? If physical and emotional closeness are what's important, what's the issue with divorce if it's done amicably?
So the problem is that divorce demands that, well, at least today's divorce demands that parents are treated with a certain amount of, I don't know, gender equality or 50-50, you know, this whole idea of fairness, you know. And the truth is that what's happened is quite a good thing, which is that fathers are now recognized as being very important to babies. And they are.
Yeah.
But they're important to babies.
To be fair, I think, like, just statistically, if you look at, you know, people born in fatherless households, admittedly, like, there would be a selection bias there, because people who would have probably problems forming relationships, or rather maintaining those same relationships, would probably be higher likelihood for other stuff. But, like, just statistically, those people are highly more prone to commit murder. Well, I say commit murder. I don't know. I think any statistic you would look at would show that those people, in general, are far more highly inclined to do criminal activity writ large. They're far more likely to end up in prison, if that makes sense. But again, like, I don't know if that's a causal thing or if it's just a result of, hey, people who get divorces tend to be less good at managing relationships in general. They tend to be less good at a lot of stuff. And consequently, yes, the children of those people being raised by those people might be more inclined towards that as something. if it's just the action itself or the lack of a father itself that's doing it, or if there's other factors.
Different way than mothers, if the mother is the primary attachment figure. If the father is the primary attachment figure, then he's the primary attachment figure. But for the most part, mothers who give birth to babies, who breastfeed babies, who nurture babies, they still are the primary attachment figures. And so if you take a baby who's breastfeeding and is in a state of attachment security, building that attachment security with the mother, and is securely attached to that mother, and now the judge comes in who has no psychological awareness or sense and says, right, like King Solomon, split this baby in half, 50-50. Take the baby away from the breastfeeding mother.
For the record, that was, yeah, if you know the story, he was trying to reveal the true mother, I guess.
Who sleeps.
Interesting idea. I guess I don't know if like he would have actually gotten the true mother, but like it feels like, that whole story just is a little bit weird. But, hopefully they got the right one.
Co-sleeping with the baby and give the baby to the father 3 days a week. And now this baby's traumatized. This baby has just lost their entire sense, the person that is the center of their universe and the center of their security. And for what? Because of fairness? Because the father needs to have 50-50? So the idea being, in the first 3 years, that baby needs the mother more than the father. That doesn't mean the baby doesn't need the father, but the baby needs the mother, if the mother is the primary attachment figure, more than the father. The cases that I've worked on where the children do the best are the cases where, are the families where the father has a tremendous amount of respect for that attachment security and doesn't think of his own personal needs or a sense of fairness, or as if the baby is a possession. The story of King Solomon is two mothers come in and say, each mother says, this is my baby. They bring a baby in. And King Solomon says, well, you both can't be the mothers. And so
not if you watch Star Wars Acolyte.
He says, guards, come over here, cut the baby in half, and you'll each get half of the baby. And one of the mothers steps forward and says, no, don't cut the baby. Leave the baby alone.
I'm just like wondering, like, what was the other mother thinking in that scenario? Like, what? Like, we can both eat the baby or some... For the record, I don't know what the area that was. Like, what was going on there?
Give the baby to her.
I think there were scenarios in which they were starving or something that they may have resorted to cannibalism. I'm not for sure, though. You have to look that up. But man, oh man.
Solomon, in his wisdom, knew what he was doing. He said, you're the mother. Not the selfish one, but the selfless one. So parents have a very hard time when they divorce. Yeah. For good reason, because they're in such incredible pain. It is such an incredibly painful thing to see parents go through. They're in...
I was going to say, never mind.
Such pain, they focus on their own pain and their own desires and their own needs and their own sense of fairness.
There was actually, like, in kind of going along with this, there was a weird thing, I think some sort of study. I don't know how reliable it is. You'd probably have to look it up. Where they asked effectively people, I think, who were divorced or whatever, like, if they could be happy for the rest of their lives, but their partner would be happy, they could choose that, or they could choose to be miserable for the rest of their lives, and their partner would also be miserable. Well, that is, their former partner, right? And I think they kind of unequivocally chose to be miserable for the rest of their lives and allow their former partner to be miserable. Like, that was kind of the thing they went for, which is it's kind of a sad commentary on human nature, that you would rather be in pain than have your partner be happy. It's like, yeah.
Rather than focusing on what's developmentally correct for babies.
A lot of courts push for 50-50 custody. I've seen this.
Right.
What does the science say about that?
It says that I think the courts are not psychologically aware. I don't think they do it maliciously. But I think that they do it because of this whole societal movement towards we're exactly the same. There's no difference between men and women. And, all right,
based. We'll leave it there. You can check out the rest if you like. Why children of divorce grow into broken adults. Anyways, moving on.